The Jewish nation is at war, an existential war. Many wonder, can we win and how do we win? Thank you to Jewish hero Jonathan Pollard, who in a spirit of love for the Jewish people provides answers to these questions, and also in the spirit of Machon Shilo led by Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom and welcome to all our viewers and to my friend Jonathan Pollard. Shalom.
Shalom.
Today, let us begin with the neighbor to our east. To our east, across the Jordan River, is a country known today as Jordan. So once upon a time, not all that long ago, it was known as Transjordan. But if you go back a little further in history, you will see no such entity on any map. And this country, which is almost a caricature of a country, despite its small size, lack of clout, and lack of any achievement, has tremendous chutzpah and is making all kinds of demands of Israel. Before we go into those demands, I wanted to ask you, Jonathan, to enlighten us with regards to the history of this country of Jordan. What is it? Where did it come from? How did it come about? Who's responsible? Because despite the fact that all these are well-known and documented historical facts, many people actually do not know these facts and are quite ignorant. So please fill in the blanks.
Without going back all the way to the biblical era, where we had tribes that occupied the Transjordan area, so we have roots there. And they were settlements that were defended by the Hasmoneans, by the Maccabees first and then the Hasmoneans. So it's not as if we are foreign to that area. We were there when we crossed the Jordan, when Bnei Israel crossed the Jordan under Yoshua ben Nun. And we were there for many, 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 many years. In the wake of World War I, I'm making a big jump now. In the wake of World War I, what did we find there? In the ruins of the Ottoman Empire, the area which is now known as Jordan was basically one big desert. It was a transit zone, if you will, for wandering Bedouin tribes coming out of Saudi Arabia and from Syria, Greater Syria as it was known. So it was a desert area. There were a few villages here and there, a few towns here or there, but it was basically known as a transit area for wandering nomadic Bedouin tribes. Nothing sedentary, so to speak. Well, at the San Remo conference, which a lot of people are not aware of, in the wake of World War I, a controlling document was created by the international community that identified, basically, and codified and legalized the notion of the British Mandate. And that included an area such as that's now known as Jordan and our territories and pre-1967 Israel. There were modifications done to this, minor ones, that had strategic importance, such as the Golan Heights, that were illegally by the British turned over to the French for their mandate in exchange for some territorial changes in Iraq. But the main event that happened was in 1920, following the end of the Saudi Civil War. During this civil war, the Hashemites, who had allied themselves with the British against the Turk, lost to the Sauds. And the British were left in a quandary. what to do with the Hashemites. Well, the one thing they did was they put one Hashemite on a created throne of Iraq. And that Hashemite king survived until the 50s when he was murdered, violently overthrown by nationalists, Iraqi nationalists who were really fascists more than anything else. It was a military coup. The other Hashemite, Abdullah, was put on a wholly artificial throne of Transjordan. The British violated every law in the book by cleaving off that part of the mandate that was east of the Jordan, creating Transjordan. And they put a ruling dynasty in place, the Hashemites, that had never been there before. They were truly outsiders from Saudi Arabia.
Just to recap for one moment, all of these areas that we're discussing, what is called today Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, Syria, Iraq, etc., these were all part of the Ottoman Empire up until the end of the First World War.
Pretty much so, yes.
And at that time, as the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the League of Nations was formed, and the League of Nations decided that the British, being one of the conquering powers and also being a superpower at that time, would be given control and a mandate over certain parts of that formerly Ottoman-ruled areas, namely what we call today Israel, what is today Jordan,
Iraq,
the Golan Heights, parts of Iraq, etc. All quite a large swath of area, much of which was desert, as you pointed out. This became known as the British Mandate, the area of the British Mandate, and it was given by the League of Nations to the British on the understanding, not just an understanding, it was an official
obligation, a legal obligation,
an official legally binding obligation, legally binding by international law, that they would establish a homeland for the Jews in that area of the British Mandate. This connects, of course, to the famous Balfour Declaration of 1917.
Correct.
Okay, now, where did this begin to unravel? What did the British do that was illegal?
What happened at the end of the Saudi Civil War was that their ally, the Hashemites, were defeated by the Sauds. And the British felt an obligation, a responsibility for their allies, wartime allies. So one of the things they did was to patch together 3 provinces of Iraq, the southern Shiite province, the central Sunni province around Baghdad, and the northern Kurdish area that had never been joined before. And the British joined them and installed a Hashemite king, created a dynasty, if you will, to rule over everything in Iraq. They created a country.
Just to clarify, the Sauds, the House of Saud, and the Hashemite allies that you refer to, these are just different Bedouin tribes who inhabited different areas of what is today called Saudi Arabia, what was then called Arabia, which had been part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. These were rival factions and tribes within Arabia. The Hashemites had allied themselves with the British. Eventually, the House of Saud gained the upper hand, and the British had to accept that and cut a deal with them. But they also tried to look out for their allies, the Hashemites. So they created a couple of artificial non-existent nations. One is the nation so-called of Iraq, which we all see today. What a wonderful creation that was. It's really working out well.
Right.
And even if it can be said to have worked out to some extent. In other words, when you have a maniacal, bloodthirsty, murderous psychopath like Saddam Hussein in charge, then because he instills terror in all, he's able to hold such a not official faction together in the same way that Muammar Gaddafi was able to hold together something called Libya. But as soon as you remove that strong man,
they blow up.
Then they immediately unravel, because there was never any organic and authentic reason why there should be a nation.
Remain a nation state. Correct.
So they invented Iraq, which is, as we say, a great success. And because the Americans decided finally to remove Saddam Hussein, so they essentially just handed it over to Iran.
Correct.
Another great success of U.S. foreign policy. They also invented Saudi Arabia and set up that kingdom. And they did that mainly because of the oil. It was known by that time that there were huge oil reserves, and oil was the big thing, the next big thing. And the third state that they invented was Jordan, or what they called then Transjordan.
Transjordan, correct.
How and when exactly was Transjordan created?
It was about 1920, when Winston Churchill was the head of the colonial office. And he had a certain affinity for the Hashemites because of their loyalty during the war. And so he just arbitrarily cleaved off illegally 2/3 of the mandate, the Palestine Mandate, as it was called, and created a country called Transjordan and installed a Hashemite prince as the king of Transjordan.
An unemployed Arabian prince,
right?
Who needed a kingdom.
Beaten up and unemployed Arabian prince, correct.
Who happened to be in dire need of a kingdom to rule.
Correct.
Winston Churchill obliged.
And he played intra-tribal politics by putting part of the Hashemites in Iraq, excuse me, and the other half in what he called Transjordan. There were people at the time that said, you can't do this, it's illegal. This area has been set aside for the Jewish national homeland, and neither he nor the British paid those concerns any mind whatsoever.
Who are the people who made those objections?
There were the people in the Yishuv, our people in particular, and there were even people, Philo Jews, people who had supported
Philo-Semites,
who had supported Balfour in the declaration that he made in 1917, who said, look here, you can't do this. It's not legal. We have not only the Balfour Declaration, but we have the ruling of San Remo, which, okay.
Tell us about San Remo.
Well, San Remo was a conference at the end of the First World War that set about to determine what exactly was going to happen with these mandates. And it wasn't just the British mandate. There was a French mandate as well in Syria and Lebanon and even parts of Turkey at one time before the Turks chucked them out. And the conclusion of the San Remo conference reached the following decision, that the area set aside for the Jewish national homeland was a unitary state. Okay, it wasn't going to be broken up at all.
Indivisible.
Indivisible. And that the Jewish people had rights, both in an area that we now call the territories, Yehuda, Shomron, Binyamin. We had the legal right to settle there, as well as in Gaza, and as well as in what's now known as Jordan. This was all supposed to be open for Jewish settlement.
In other words, all these areas, all the British Mandate areas, which was quite a sizable territory, were recognized as being the lawful possession by dint of history and continued uninterrupted Jewish settlement and residence over
Correct.
thousands of years in all these various areas. It was
Correct.
recognized that this people, the Jewish nation, were the only people who had a legitimate claim to control and establish a state in that area.
Correct. And the San Remo Conference used exactly that language. Well, what happened when the League of Nations dissipated in just before the Second World War, and there was a transition to the United Nations, something very interesting happened. The United Nations recognized that all of the agreements that had been reached by the League of Nations, in particular San Remo, would become the controlling law under the United Nations. San Remo has never been abrogated at all by the United Nations. It's just been overlooked. So when people keep beating us over the head with the second partition of the mandate that happened in 1948, when the League set aside the remaining 1/4 of the
sorry to interrupt, but you said the League, you meant the UN.
The UN set aside
47, yes.
Right. Basically, they just forgot about San Remo. Under San Remo,
you're being much too charitable. They did not forget.
They knowingly looked the other way.
As we have said before, international law is a figment of people's imagination.
Totally.
Countries and various interest groups do exactly as they please, when it suits them, as it suits them, and
however it suits them. Correct. So this is why the notion that Jordan is Palestine came about, because the legitimacy of the Hashemite rule over Jordan has been and should be called into question. When Jordan took over the territories in the wake of our War of Liberation, the War of Independence in 1948, there were only 2 countries that recognized Jordan's possession of the territories of what we call Yehuda, Shomron, and Binyamin. And who were those 2 countries? Great Britain and Pakistan. No other country, no other Arab country recognized Jordan's control over what they called the West Bank.
And Pakistan did so because they were simply a puppet at that time of the British.
That's all. So you have this problem now between the Hashemites, that are a very small percentage of the population in Jordan, and their resident so-called Palestinians. I say so-called because there is no such thing as a Palestinian people.
Agreed. So a topic for
another discussion.
This moment, but of course that is true, yes.
Right. So these people, and I will say known as Palestinians, are chafing under the Hashemite rule. They are treated as second, third, or fourth class citizens. They are seriously discriminated against. And the Hashemites, as I put it, the current Hashemite ruler, as was his father, Abdullah, and King Hussein before him, are basically one bullet away from an Islamist takeover. That's the fact of life.
Which is inevitable.
Which is inevitable. Because the country itself is an economic basket case. And what we've seen over the past couple of years is a disaffection on the part of the Bedouin themselves, the bedrock of the Hashemite dynasty, joining demonstrations, riots, protests against their own people. They're in government, in the Hashemites, who are nothing but a bunch of robbers, corrupt robbers.
It's essentially a failed state.
It's a failed state that's waiting to fall. I'll put it that way. It has
waiting to fail totally and completely
totally
and irreversibly.
They're on life support now by the international community and by the Gulf states, and ironically from Saudi Arabia as well. And basically, the disease of a disenfranchised population is now basically taking over the patient. And when that happens, when it happens, not if, Jordan will magically transform itself into Palestine, a revanchist, synthetic country dedicated to the total destruction of Israel. Now,
you shock me.
Well, occasionally I can do that. So yeah. What we have then is a king, Abdullah II, married to a Palestinian queen, Rania. And what he's tried to do over the past couple of decades is to divert all this internal anger against Israel, which is why, for example, he has waged a diplomatic war against Israel that is little different from what the Iranians have been doing, except, without proxy forces. Although in his case, it could be argued that the PA and the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist organizations are his proxy forces. In the event that he should fall, these are the organizations that will take over what remains of his country, of Jordan. Now, in an effort, I guess, to divert attention away from the territories, a number of nationalist Jewish groups have declared that that Jordan is Palestine. This is in an effort to kind of recognize the reality of the fact that 2/3 of the country of Jordan is populated by what they self-describe as Palestinians who don't like the king at all. So again, he diverts the anger and attention overseas against Israel. So what has been done with this? He's waged war at the UN. He's waged war internationally by personal visits to various countries. And he's also, in a sense, waged war by allowing the Waqf, this religious trust, which he has been allowed to establish on Har Habayit. They actually are the managers of Har Habayit to sermonize.
Just for clarification, we're referring to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem.
The Temple Mount.
Yes.
That this Waqf, or controlling religious organization, is basically no different than Hamas. Their sermons, if you care to read them, are some of the most bloodthirsty sermons I've ever seen, calling for the death and destruction of Jews, for the eradication of Israel. It's horrific stuff, which, unlike other Arab countries that police the sermons their imams or their religious leaders give to their people, we don't control it at all. Again, a real mistake. And so Abdullah, the king of Jordan, when riots occur on the Temple Mount, blame us that we're provoking these otherwise Pacific people into acts of violence and protest. Everything about him is diversion, deflection. And now you have a situation which is I think it's an act of chutzpah too far. And what is this? Queen Rania, who occasionally comes back to Jordan from her houses in Europe and her bank accounts, secret bank accounts in Switzerland, to attack us for October 7th. Now, you can say this is a supreme act of chutzpah. You could say that, and you would be correct. But it goes beyond this, because simultaneously with this condemnation of hers and her husband's, by the way, Abdullah II, is this demand for water, additional water, over and above what was promised Jordan by Israel in the peace treaty we signed back in the 90s. That peace treaty called for 50 million cubic meters of water to be provided to Jordan.
I must add something here. And this is a type of inside information that I came across. I have a good friend who at one time, when excuse me, when these negotiations were going on with Jordan, which resulted in the so-called peace treaty. Peace, of course, has not been in evidence, but the so-called peace treaty of 1994, according to the Gregorian calendar, when that was being negotiated, the Jordanians made a demand, as you say, for 50 million cubic meters of water, which is a large amount of water to ask from Israel, which is
a lot.
Hasn't got the water resources of, shall we say, Canada. So this friend of mine was involved in certain business dealings with another person whom he knows, that I do not know this third party, but he does. And that person was involved in those negotiations. And he heard directly from a Jordanian representative that we made that demand for a certain amount of water, fully expecting Israel to negotiate and to bargain. We asked for 50, you'll say, 20, and we'll say 40, and you'll say 30, whatever, as in any Middle Eastern bazaar.
When you're in the shuk.
Right. In the shuk, when in the world of the shuk, you behave as one does in the shuk. So if you're in a Middle Eastern bazaar, you behave accordingly. So they made a demand. They fully expected Israel to bargain them down, but they didn't.
No.
They were totally shocked that Israel said, "Okay, fine." That was it. That was the whole negotiation. I know this, as I say, from inside sources directly. That just is indicative of how irrational and how criminally negligent Israeli governments and authorities and officials of many, many decades, how completely incompetent and irresponsible they have been.
Correct. There was an additional deal made for us to sell Jordan gas for electrical production. And it was a good deal. We gave them a greatly subsidized, I'll put it that way, a greatly subsidized price for the gas. It was as I said, a good deal for Jordan, which has no fossil natural resources. So it's the parliament, the National Assembly voted against it. And the people themselves, the Jordanian people themselves, who were going to be the beneficiary of cheap energy, if you will, have consistently called for the termination of that deal. It's like they're shooting themselves in the foot, or in the head in this case. So along comes the UAE and said, okay, look, we're going to make nice between the two countries. We will build a massive solar energy field for Jordan. The energy will be provided to Israel that will build a massive desalination plant on the coast, our Mediterranean coast, and then provide Jordan with clean water, a certain percentage of clean water. Well, they just said, no, we don't want any part of that. You're slaughtering our brothers in Gaza, so we don't want that. Once again, shooting themselves in the head. So what are the Jordanians, what are the two problems I have?
I'm sorry, when was this suggestion made by the UAE?
Pardon?
When was this proposal made by the UAE?
About 2 years ago. And the negotiations started before that because we don't have enough room in Israel for the kind of solar plant that would power the size of the desalination plant that the Jordanians needed. Okay. So it was actually, I was opposed to it from the start because you never rely upon a country that's one bullet away from an Islamist state for anything, especially something as crucial as energy at all. I was opposed to it completely, and I'm not sorry that it ended, that the Jordanians pulled out of it. So there are two things that Jordan is doing to us, apart from waging a war of diplomatic offensive against us, and allowing this Islamist pro-Hamas Waqf from operating on the Temple Mount and inciting the Arabs against us every day. There are two things. One, they never have prepared their country for peace with Israel, nor have the Egyptians either, for that matter, but they have not prepared their country for peace, and they have really done very little to stem the flood of illegal weaponry into the territories, which, if you look at the various terrorist groups that are operating in Jenin and Tulkarm and Qalqilia and other places like this, they seem to be pretty well armed. And every once in a while, a shipment will be intercepted by our soldiers, our police, frontier police forces. And, you're talking hundreds of weapons, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition. Just, it's an arsenal and we capture a very small percentage of it because the Jordanians are not adequately policing their side of the border. They don't care. They don't care at all.
It should also be pointed out, to be fair, that we too in Israel are not policing the border in an effectual manner.
That is true.
I can speak for myself. Many years ago, let's say 34 years ago, I remember being in Miluim, in reserve military duty, and we patrolled up and down the Jordanian border, a certain sector of the Jordanian border, and that was the standard procedure. Had always been the standard procedure, but there were always patrols. Every morning, the border fence was checked, and the specially laid tracks on either side were checked by trackers. We had with our unit a Bedouin tracker.
Bedouin.
Yeah. I can add here parenthetically that I have a nephew who wanted to join that tracker unit. He wanted to become a tracker, in Hebrew, a gashash. And he was very good at it because he also spent a lot of time in the outdoors and what have you. And he was perfectly capable of becoming a top-notch tracker. And he was refused entry into that tracker unit of the army because he was Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
He had to be a Bedouin to join. He said, well, I can do that. I know how to, I'll show you, I'll prove it to you. And he refused to be drafted to anything else. And he actually sat in military jail for a time because he wanted to go. This is not a joke.
No, only in
this
Israel.
Is for real. This is for real.
Yeah.
This is going back, a lot of years. This is 20 odd years ago, but this is what happened. Eventually, he gave up because they kept throwing him back into military prison because he refused to join any other unit. He said, but I want to serve in the army. I want to be a tracker. And the only reason you're preventing me from doing this is because I'm Jewish. But
Religious discrimination.
there you go. But that's a fact of which I'm and fully aware.
Well, the hottest part of
I'm sorry. I just to complete what I was saying. I know that was part of Israel's defense posture. That border was regularly patrolled. That has not been the case for many years. I don't know how many years, but for many years that has not been the case. There simply have not been such patrols, which of course allows the smuggling to run wild.
The most dangerous part of the border from a smuggling standpoint is actually on the Arava, from the Dead Sea, the southern part of the Dead Sea south. Things were at one point changing. They were putting up earthen barriers, so you just couldn't drive across the border. They were patrolling more with the mixed gender units, like the Caracal and other units. But it was too little, too late, because the connections with the Israeli Bedouin tribes that occupy that area were too strong.
Occupy being the operative word.
Yeah, occupying.
They just literally. We're talking about massive land grabs.
Correct.
Entirely illegal, and they just occupy huge swaths of territory.
Right, and want retroactive legalization of their theft. So this was the connection, and what the Bedouins haven't stolen from areas like training bases like Se'elim, with the army and police just looking the other way while these guys haul out truckloads of weapons, which then are combined with the truckloads of weapons that are coming across the Arava from Jordan. You have what you have now when you look at these groups when they have these open air meetings and events in Jenin and Tulkarm and Qalqilia and places like this. I mean, they're very well armed, extremely well armed.
That is also the source of all the weaponry, or almost most of the weaponry that is in the hands of the Arab criminal class in this country, which is immense. They have apparently limitless access to weaponry.
Look, it took me 3 years to get my neshek, my gun, for various political reasons. If I were an Arab, I could have gotten a gun overnight. Anything I wanted, actually. And nobody was going to track me down for that and put me in jail for owning an illegal firearm. So this issue of illegal firearms, again, involves Jordan. And as little as we've done to police our border, they've done even less. So when they want to police a border, they can do it. If you look at what they do up in the northern part of their country on the Syrian border, they are in a almost daily gun battle with drug dealers who are trying to come across from organizations like ISIS and others, and now Hezbollah as well is in the drugs trade. They are fighting them tooth and nail on the border. So they have the ability to defend a border when they want to, but they just haven't exhibited that same kind of professionalism when it comes to defending their border with us. So you have this situation now where they're waging war by other means against us. And by the way, they don't want an independent Palestinian state in the territories, or as they call it, the West Bank, any more than we do, because they know that if there is a Palestinian state established, either just in the territories or in combination with Gaza, they might as well the Hashemites better pack their bags and leave. So let's not fool ourselves that they're such avid supporters of Palestinian nationalism. Rhetorically, they are, but in fact, they are not. So knowing that it's just a matter of time before the Islamists take over that country, I have been opposed totally to granting them additional water above and beyond what we stupidly offered them as part of the peace treaty with them. And I think to really teach them a lesson, we should have problems with our supply of water and our supply of gas to their generators. Technical issues. We're sorry.
Unfortunate and difficult to solve.
Unforeseen. And we're terribly sorry. Unless they change their ways. When people have asked me if I could do anything to solve the, quote, Palestinian problem, what it would be. And the answer is from the territories to Jordan, their homeland, so to speak. And people have asked me, well, if that happens, you're sealing the fate of the Hashemites. I said, well and good. And they said, well, isn't that going to create...
They have it coming.
They have it coming, as they do. And they say, well, isn't that just going to create another enemy on our eastern border? And I said, well, I look at it this way. It would finally give us the opportunity at the end of the day to reclaim by war what was illegally taken away from us in 1920 and be done with this whole problem.
By Winston Churchill and His Majesty's government. And His Majesty's government,
correct. So the problem with a lot of people I talk to in this country is they think in terms of checkers, not chess. And so when I kind of spin out or project where I would like us to be heading, they're totally confused because they get too spun up about the process as opposed to the objective. The process is not a nice one, but it's one that has been done throughout history. And it's one that would be a lot kinder, is a lot kinder than if these people, the expellees, were simply massacred. Has also been done throughout history. So in conclusion, the situation with Jordan right now has reached a point where we simply have to tell them, goodbye. We're finished with you.
The free lunch is over.
The free lunch is over. And for your information, we're getting rid of the Waqf. We are declaring sovereignty over the Temple Mount. The Ministry of Religion, our Ministry of Religion, will take over the administration of the various Muslim places of worship there until that point in time when total Jewish control of the Temple Mount can be reestablished, hopefully in our lifetime. The Jordanians won't like it, but who cares? What are they going to do? If they need water, they can turn to the Saudis or the Emirates and say, build us a massive water plant, desalination plant in Aqaba. And by the way, provide us with a pipeline and pumping stations so we can bring the water north. Yeah, good luck with that. These countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia generally don't put their money on a dying horse. And this is what Jordan is right now.
How do you envisage the future of this artificial invention of the British known as Jordan?
A bloody one.
As we said, it's inevitable that it will become some kind of Islamic.
It'll become an Islamist
terror state, but
on
a war footing, constant war footing against Israel.
Correct. They will slaughter the Hashemites, and then they will declare themselves to be Palestine with a revanchist philosophy towards Israel and the territories. And that country will immediately be recognized by everybody, including the United States. kind of like a Taliban state, except 2.0. And as I said, then we will have a target that we can eliminate in a conventional war and be done with it. We can't necessarily do that now because, well, we're Jews and we don't slaughter people, unarmed people, like the Arabs do. We don't do that. And I am very proud of that fact. So we'll slaughter them in terms of the state they form and just eliminate it. That's my understanding.
What you're saying basically is they will force our hand, as it were.
We will let them.
They will leave us no option. There will be no option.
Correct. There will be no option at all. Now, when this state is formed, there will be a cry, a call for the Arabs who inhabit the territories right now to leave. Even leftists will understand that they're not so much a fifth column, but the leading element of an invading army. And ironically, the PA and all their fellow travelers who have longed for a state will finally have one, but it's not where they think it will be. It will be across the Jordan, and they can enjoy it for as long as it exists, which I, again, don't foresee to be too long.
Would you like to hazard a guess as to when the Hashemite grip on Jordan will come to an end?
I think we can help them along. I think if we stopped supplying water at all, because they violated almost every clause in the peace treaty with us. So the treaty is abrogated by them. Okay. We stop supplying them water. We stop supplying them fuel. Food riots will break out. Other economic riots will break out. And there will be a general uprising. And as much as, the Arab Legion likes to kill quote unquote Palestinians, as they did in Black September, when they killed upwards of 20,000 of them, they won't be able to hold it together. There'll be a general uprising. And then it's over. It's finished. When can that take place? As I said, we can accelerate that by cutting off all water, all energy sales to them, transfers to them, and the process will begin. Now, the king will scream and yell. He'll go around with hat in hand, or in this case, crown in hand, and he will ask for money from everybody, from the World Bank to the IMF to the Saudis, ironically, to the Gulf states. I mean, as much money as he can get, although most of the money that he has amassed are in banks right now in Europe. He's not stupid. But it won't be enough. It just won't be enough. And things will get out of hand rather quickly. And I would say within 1 year, after we terminate all economic relations with Jordan, and that means closing the Jordan River Valley crossings, there'll be one-way traffic. If you want to leave the territories, you're welcome to go. Don't come back. So if you want to leave, you can leave. I would say about a year, and then it's over. Then you have a Palestinian state announced where Jordan was. You'll have a massive transfer in the territories within the following year, so that's 2 years. And by the third year, we'll be forced to eliminate the state. And that'll be the end of it. And we should say we are reclaiming land that was legally deeded to us by an internationally recognized agreement known as San Remo. And if you want to have a problem with that, take it up with the United Nations.